A very good morning to you guys. Welcome to Asake Online. And this is the Breakfast Club. My name is Brighton Ncube. So last week, the President Emerson Mnangagwa came to Bulawayo to launch the Gukurahundi outreach programs that are going to be led by chiefs in Matebeleland and some parts of Midlands. So today on the show, we want to unpack that and analyze that with Reverend Motsi joining me this morning as my guest. Good morning to you, Rev. Welcome to the show.
Good morning and good morning to listeners.
Let's talk about the Gukurahundi outreach programs, the role of the chiefs. Are they capable? Do they have the capacity to lead these community outreach programs?
Probably what we should talk about is what does that mean? And the unfortunate part is nobody is able to answer that question. Because first and foremost, nobody knows exactly what the mandate is or what they intend to do with it. Secondly, we know that there's no legal framework for that mandate. The third thing, we are very much aware that there's no budget. Because it's not within the government framework per se. So there's no budget line within the system. And therefore, it is a personal project of the president. And whatever he wishes is what's going to happen. And therefore, this process has no sincerity, and I don't think it's as serious as what we would have loved it to be.
Mm-hmm. We're speaking earlier on different platform where Zapu was saying they want Zapu and Zipras to be involved as well. And also, what's your take on that, in terms of Zipra and Zapu being involved as well in this process?
There are two ways in which I can actually tackle the issue of Zapu and Zipra. First and foremost, if the current government acknowledges that this was to do with Zapu, and hence they signed a pact with them, they should have involvement in the first place, but they didn't. Again, that's a sign of insincerity. Secondly, the issue of Zapu as a political party is a big issue, because one of the biggest concerns that we have is the fact that ZANU-PF does not consider any other political party in Zimbabwe. They think they are the only ones. All other parties are not parties, and they are not worth to be considered as political parties. Because if this is a serious agenda, national agenda, surely Zapu as the main target of Gukurahundi, official target, they should have been the ones who have been allowed to lead and help people as they deal with this issue with the government.
Every time I speak about Gukurahundi, there's been this issue of ceasefire, to say the Unitary Code of 1987 also nullified whatever happened before that. Talk to us more about the Unitary Code. Does it even explicitly say about anything about Gukurahundi?
The Unitary Code does not talk about Gukurahundi. The Unitary Code talks about dissidents and what ZANU-PF and government considered as an insurrection against a so-called legitimate government, as they say. So the idea was that Zapu has got to acknowledge that they were not going to do that anymore, and they will seek a unit and become one, which has always been what Mugabe wanted right from the beginning, because Mugabe believed in one-party state. And so as soon as Nkomo said that he could accept being swallowed by ZANU, it meant that therefore ZANU was ultimate winner. It was the winner take all.
When you look at these programs now that have been launched in Matebeleland, they're going to be done in rural areas, right? But some of the victims are in the diaspora now. Some have moved to the UK, some have moved to South Africa. What about those victims in terms of being heard as well?
Again, sincerity and genuine. If this process was genuine, there would have been a process and a time in which there's acknowledgement of all victims, irrespective of where they are, and that they acknowledge that they needed help. To then hear a statement that says this is only going to be limited to the rural Matebeleland. It shows that probably the scope of this process is not what most of us expected, and as a result, it may not be able to achieve whatever we thought it could achieve. And hence, we don't really think that it's going to help a lot. Nevertheless, there is a token value to the fact that Mnangagwa has given mandate, so there's given authority for people to talk about Gukurahundi. If there's an acknowledgement, that's the only thing he has done, and nothing more and nothing less.
But also, Rev, if you go back to the roles of a chief, according to the Constitution of Zimbabwe and also the Chiefs and something Act of the Council of the Chiefs, what do they still place their roles of chiefs? Do the chief have the jurisdiction to preside over something like Gukurahundi?
No, they don't. That's why I'm saying they have been given authority by the president, and the president has used some kind of executive powers to allow the chiefs to actually do that. Unfortunately, as a result of that, the results and the findings cannot be taken anywhere else as a legal document because there's no legal framework under which they are being undertaken.
So how is this process supposed to be handled? Earlier on, someone said to us the issue of the independent commission handling this process. How are supposed to be handled according to you?
Normally, according to international standards, we're supposed to have an acknowledgement of a ceasefire where the people that perpetrated are no longer in power. And it means there is a leveling of the playing field through some kind of transitional justice mechanism, after which somebody else then comes and arbitrate, enables the two groups to speak together about what actually happened as equals. That is not happening right now because government, which is the perpetrator, is the one that says we are now going to solve it. There's no justice there, there's no fairness.
When you talk to some of the victims, some of them, they don't want to speak about Gukurahundi and their experience. Some of them were speaking out at this time and for the first time. Do you think this is going to not maybe revoke old wounds?
It is definitely going to revoke old wounds. But I think it's important for us to talk about this because as long as issues of Gukurahundi are not openly dealt with, this issue, you cannot shy it away. It's not going to disappear on its own. There has to be ways and means in which this is spoken. Now, in the process of doing that, there's a special word we use in isiNdebele, ukuthunukisa. You might be seeming to be somebody who is making it painful when in actual fact you want to squeeze the pus out of the wound in order to clean it and give medication. It's a process that is necessary, but it's a very painful process. And I think a lot of people need to acknowledge this, that while other people are saying it's painful, well, it has been painful for 36, 38 years for other people who have lived with it. They are looking for help so that the pain will come to an end. You cannot then therefore say, I'm going to live with it because I don't want to make it more worse. It can never be more worse than what it is now. And it has to be handled.
But also looking at this, Rev, these raids are going to be done in rural areas, right? There's a fear of victimization of the victims as well. Say let's go to this meeting and speak out, later on victimized. Remember also during Gukurahundi there was forced disappearance.
Sure.
Are we not tapping into that area now where people are going to be victimized after speaking out about their experience as well?
Unfortunately, I can't guarantee that there's not going to be victimization. Unfortunately, I have no information or means through which I could reassure the better people or victims that if you speak and you malign the government or the president or Gukurahundi or anybody for that, or Shona for that matter, you're going to be safe. I can't give that kind of promise. And that is part of the problem of this process. Because unless you are able to guarantee people their protection from victimization, then this process is not a good process. It's not fair, especially for the victims. And that's what the problem is. Yes, there will be, probably there are, yes, let me confess, yes, there are probably police details which are assigned to chiefs wherever they're doing this, but obviously their mandate is not going to go any further. But the biggest challenge is when people that come and they talk about rape and they talk about killing, which is criminal issues, what are the chiefs going to do with it? Because we know that according to the Chiefs Act, criminal issues are dealt by the courts and not by the chiefs. And see, these are the kind of things that are not explained. And we wish we could have answers and respond to people. And so, how are the victims going to be assured? I don't think there's any way victims can be assured in our context.
But allow me to look at the Rwanda genocide. Something happened in Rwanda, but they've moved past that. There was a reconciliation, there was truth-telling and so on. What can we learn from Rwandan genocide?
I thank God that I spent a bit of time in Rwanda studying what actually happened there. One of the key aspects about the Rwanda genocide was the fact that the government acknowledged that this is a social, it's happened at a social level and at a political level. They acknowledged the two areas. And they said, while the government will give the legislation, legal framework, that if a perpetrator who killed somebody in the village because they were known, if they went back to that village, accept to be tried by the local leadership and be sentenced by the local leadership, the legal framework will acknowledge that as binding. So that's what they did. So they then went to the prisons and they said to the victimizers, anybody who wants to go back to the village from where they come and are tried by the local people, we will allow you to. And the story will end right there. We're not going to take it any further. Because whatever the victims say, that's what would happen. So there's an empowerment to the victims to give them the power to decide. And that really was the most powerful thing that happened. And for your own information, there was not even one person who was killed because he had killed people in the village. They were given community service. They found ways in which to dig deep tanks to roads, to schools, clinics, to be involved in various community works where somebody will spend 2-3 months working for the community and being known and seen by everybody on a daily basis. For the victims to come and sit down and talk to you whilst you're doing whatever, and talk to you in terms of what happened. That was the power of the Rwanda process in terms of healing. People were given the opportunity to have a say, the responsibility to decide what they could do with those that had perpetrated crimes against them.
If you're just joining us, this is the Breakfast Club. I'm in conversation with the Reverend Raymonds around the Gukurahundi outreach programs. Remember, they were recently launched by the President Mnangagwa in Bulawayo. So the chiefs are going to be going out in the rural areas of Matabeleland, heading these hearings programs. But also, Rev, let me bring the issue now of reconciliation without truth-telling. Can there be reconciliation without truth-telling?
Now, there are very key processes that you have mentioned. Reconciliation on one side, truth-telling on the other. Obviously, what must come first is truth-telling for reconciliation to take place. There is not going to be any reconciliation unless there is truth-telling. Now, in truth-telling, there is something that is very fundamental that I would like to unpack. It's called acknowledgement. Acknowledgement is not the same as apology. An apology is an old man with gray hair if I do something wrong to you and I say, I'm sorry, my son, and young man is here, you see, you can't go and start shouting about what I've done to people out there when I said sorry to you. That's the problem with an apology. But an acknowledgement, ngesindebele, ikukhumisa nomlotha. You know, it's a process that people have got to go through by other people acknowledging what they have done, accepting what they have done, and also being able to go and sit at the table with the people that you have wronged and say, so what do we do in order to repair what has happened? So that is part and parcel of the process, because truth-telling must lead to reconciliation. There's not going to be any reconciliation without truth-telling. And that is part of the problem. Now, truth-telling, in our opinion, yes, there's some semblance of truth-telling in what this process is meant to do. But unfortunately, there is no mandate for the chiefs to do anything about the truth that they're going to hear. They can't take it any further than themselves. And that's unfortunate.
But also the aspect of counseling now, Rev. You know, some people are 30 something years after the genocide happened. People are still walking without any counseling. They're still carrying their trauma and so on. How big is the part of counseling to those victims?
I'll give you two examples of the importance of counseling. One is the local one, and the other one is the Ghanaian tribunal. So the local one was of a gentleman who was in the Air Force, whose father was killed during Gukurahundi. And when he was told, he got into the train, he came to Bulawayo. And when he got to Bulawayo, he was told that he cannot come to the rural area because the people who killed his father were waiting for him to kill him. So he stayed in Bulawayo for 7 days, after which he went back to Harare to the Air Force. And he continued to work for the Air Force until he retired. I then met him and we started talking about Gukurahundi as a process of counseling. That was the first time of him talking about, it was almost 28 years, talking about Gukurahundi, and he collapsed. He cried and cried for more than 1.5 hours because it was traumatizing, even to simply explain what actually happened. But eventually we went through counseling. We did a memorial for his father, whose shallow grave was in front of the house, and he slaughtered a beast, and he says, for the first time, I'm able to talk about my father. I'd never done that before. And his mother, who had moved away, came back and started staying in the village again, the homestead, because of that process. The Ghanaian tribunal was a young man who was arrested, tortured. He was put on the 25th floor. He stayed there for 2 weeks. He never heard anything except for the local newspaper, which publicized what Jerry Rowland and other people were doing. And he was released, and the following day he escaped. He went to UK, and he had the opportunity to go to school. He became a very successful lawyer. During the tribunal, he registered to be a victim and to come and testify. He was told that he needed to go through counseling, and he said no, he didn't want that. He was an educated somebody. He had control. So during the tribunal, the questioning, they asked him to, he kept on saying, then he arrested me, then he put me in this confinement, and he kept on saying he, and they kept on pushing who is the he. We cannot go ahead. The moment he mentioned Jerry Rowland, he collapsed. He died. But he had refused counseling. We cannot overemphasize or underestimate the trauma that the victims have gone through. The need for counseling is critical. And we just hope that the chiefs will summon churches, pastors, and other traditional people around to help the victims as they give their testimonies, because it's going to open old wounds, and there are certain things that will come that they may never have expected to be there in the process.
Too many times, Rev, we say, if I vent about a problem that I'm facing, I heal. How important is the aspect of venting out? We call it ukubhodla, ukhuluma what happened. How important is that aspect in terms of healing?
That's why we talk about Truth Commission. It's a process of ukubhodla, to burp, to allow people to have something that can help them to release the inner tensions. It's like you put a kettle on a fire, and when it's boiling, it lifts up the lid. When the lid gets up, it gets controlled. And that's exactly the same problem. The problem that we have in Matabeleland, particularly the victims of Gukurahundi, is that they've had, some of them, 40 years without having spoken about Gukurahundi openly. And allowing them to talk about it is going to allow other emotions to actually take place. But most importantly, there are chemical substance in us when we are hurt, when we are angry, when we are victims, that is there. And when you disturb it, you start talking about, it begins to affect your complete personality. And it's so dangerous because if you do not have professional help, especially psychosocial support to help with these victims, a lot of them would actually probably have a mental problems with those issues.
Yeah. You spoke about the Truth-Telling Commission. I remember the NPRC, its mandate expired, its term of office expired last year, August, before the elections. But their responsibilities now taken to the Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission. In your own view, Rev, do you think they achieved their mandate? In particular, when I look at the NPRC, I'm coming from Matabeleland. Their main focus, according to me, should be on Gukurahundi. But do you think they achieved their mandate?
They did not. Unfortunately, we felt that they were going to collect information from people and put it in some kind of a compendium, which would then be given to government, and the government would then put in place mechanisms of how to respond and deal with the findings of the NPRC. That was their mandate. That never happened. So they never fulfilled their mandate. The first commissions tried to actually do that. The second group of commissioners was never able to do anything about it. So it was, I think it was a fuss about nothing.
But also, Rev, look at the impact of Gukurahundi. I'm saying, maybe my grandfather was the first victim of Gukurahundi. My father was also disciplined. But also, they've all passed away. Only remaining is me, the generation victim. Let's speak about that in terms of solving Gukurahundi, when the victims are slowly dying and nothing's being done.
I think you need to understand that you are not just a third generation. You are what we call a secondary victim, because obviously there's been oral information being passed on. Secondly, there's been this hurt and pain that your grandfather and your father may have suffered. This has been passed on to you, and therefore you are a secondary victim, number one, or we can call it associated trauma, because the way in which you observed your parents or your grandfather suffer and talk and cry about Gukurahundi also affects you in a different way. And therefore, you are a victim of Gukurahundi in what we call it, almost like a domino effect of the effects of Gukurahundi. And it's not always easy. It needs somebody who understands, who will have to help you to deal with it. And so we look at memory as the biggest challenge. Memory is an issue. If you remember and it pains you, your memory is still a sword. It means you haven't healed. If you remember and it doesn't have the same pain, there's some level of healing. We use that as a standard, and as a result, the majority of Ndebeles that we know, that we have spoken to, they cry when we talk about Gukurahundi. It means it's still painful. So it means they haven't healed. And that's part of the problem.
But now let's bring the aspect of transitional justice in terms of Gukurahundi. How can this be solved going forward?
Now, transitional justice is something that is not known by a lot of our Zimbabwean people. Transitional justice is a process through which, after a ceasefire, after a stoppage of a crisis, there are mechanisms that are put in place in order to level the playing field so that when you start dealing with the issues, everybody is on the same level. That did not happen in Zimbabwe. So there is no way we can talk about ceasefire because there has not been any transitional justice mechanism to assist people to be all at the same level. What happened was just a process in which we helped ZANU-PF to entrench themselves in power. And therefore, that power they have is even more now than what they had before. And therefore, you can never talk about healing, you can never talk about ceasefire when, for an example, this is a fact. Emmerson Mnangagwa was Minister of Security in the Prime Minister's office. Now he is the president. He is the one who is leading the process of healing. It just doesn't make sense. Because one cannot be the judge, one cannot be the prosecutor, one cannot be the accused, the victim at the same time. And that's the problem.
Rev, in closing, as we wrap up the show this morning, what are your key maybe takeaways from these Gukurahundi outreach programs? What should be done differently?
I think I need to be the positive thing that some of us are excited about is that for more than 30 years, we have been clamoring for Gukurahundi to be a national agenda. It is not just a crime against the better people. It is a crime against humanity. It is a genocide. And that is something that we have been clamoring. And to see some kind of level of this kind of understanding is very helpful. Number two, we also think that there is a little bit of a door that was space that has opened in the door by the NPRC, and it continues with this chief's process that we can now begin to talk about Gukurahundi is a positive thing. But I don't think that the process itself is going to achieve anything tangible that would actually help the people of Matabeleland, except those that are able to confess and talk about it to burp a little bit.
Thanks so much for your time this morning on The Breakfast Club.
The pleasure is mine. Thank you.
Well, I've been watching The Breakfast Club this morning. My guest is Reverend Raymond, speaking about the Gukurahundi outreach programs which are rolled out in the past weeks by the President of Zimbabwe, Emmerson Mnangagwa. They're going to be led by chiefs in the rural areas of Matabeleland. I hope you guys enjoy the show, and please drop us your comments, your contributions to the show, and also to follow us on YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, as well as Instagram. From myself, Brighton Ncube, it's bye for now.